The air in our home grew heavy that evening. It was a suffocating stillness, that calm that comes just before a storm. My sister Clara stood with tears streaming down her face. Her words were sharp and deliberate, like carefully chosen stones meant to cause the most harm. She painted a picture of me that I did not recognize, a portrait of deceit and betrayal. The lie she told was a simple one, yet it was devastatingly effective. It twisted my actions and my intentions into something dark and unrecognizable. I watched my parents' faces change as they listened. Their expressions moved from confusion to disbelief, and finally, to a cold, hard certainty that settled like a permanent winter. I tried to speak, to push back against the tide of falsehoods, but my voice was lost in the storm Clara had created. My words were small and weak against the force of her accusations. My parents, who had known me my entire life, now looked at me as if I were a stranger. The trust that had been the bedrock of our family had crumbled into dust in a matter of minutes. They saw only the version of me that Clara had presented, a version that was selfish and unkind. Their hearts closed to me, and in that moment, I felt the ground beneath me give way. The home I had always known was no longer a sanctuary. It was now a place of judgment. The final words were quiet, but they carried the weight of a lifetime. "You must leave," my father said, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. My mother simply turned away, unable to meet my eyes. Her silence was more painful than any shouted word. I packed a small bag in a daze, moving through the familiar rooms that now felt alien and hostile. Each object I touched held a memory, a ghost of a happier time. The family photographs on the wall seemed to mock me, their smiling faces a cruel reminder of what I was losing. I was being cast out, exiled from the only world I had ever known, all because of a story that was not true. As I stepped out into the cold night, the door closed behind me with a sound of finality. It was more than just a door closing. It was the end of a chapter, the end of my life as I knew it. The darkness of the street seemed to stretch on forever, the physical manifestation of the uncertainty that lay ahead. The warmth and light of my family home were gone, replaced by a profound and chilling emptiness. I was alone, adrift in a world that suddenly felt vast and unforgiving. The weight of the betrayal was a physical ache in my chest, a wound that I knew would take a very long time to heal, if it ever could. In the days that followed, I existed in a state of shock. The world seemed muted, its colors faded, and its sounds distant. I would wake up each morning with a brief blissful moment of forgetting, only to have the reality of my situation come crashing down on me. The pain of my family's rejection was a constant companion, a dull, persistent ache that settled deep within my bones. I replayed that final evening over and over in my mind, searching for a way I could have changed the outcome, but there was no answer, only the echoing silence from the home I was no longer welcome in. My calls went unanswered. My letters were returned, unopened. The sense of loss was overwhelming. It was not just the loss of my home, but the loss of my identity. I had always been a daughter, a sister. Now, I was nothing. The foundation of my life had been ripped away, and I was left floating in a void of confusion and grief. I would walk for hours, hoping to tire myself out, to quiet the relentless thoughts that plagued me. The faces of strangers on the street seemed to blur together, each one a reminder of the connections I no longer had. I felt like a ghost, haunting the edges of a world I could no longer participate in. Loneliness became my closest acquaintance. It sat with me at meals and lay beside me at night. The silence in my small, rented room was deafening, a stark contrast to the lively, chaotic noise of my family home. I missed the simple things most of all. The sound of my mother humming in the kitchen, the way my father would read the newspaper aloud, even the arguments with my sister over trivial things. These small, everyday moments were the threads that had woven our lives together, and now they were all gone. The tapestry of my family was unraveling, and I was a loose thread cast aside. The betrayal cut deeper than the rejection. It was the fact that it came from my own sister, the person I had shared my childhood with, my secrets, my dreams. I could not understand the source of her animosity, the reason for such a cruel and calculated lie. The person I thought I knew had been replaced by a stranger, one capable of a coldness I could never have imagined. This new reality was a difficult one to accept. It forced me to question everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and the bonds of family. My heart was a landscape of desolation, scarred by a betrayal that felt like a natural disaster. Years began to pass, measured not in days or months, but in the slow, steady rhythm of the seasons. I moved away from the city, seeking solace in a place where the sky was wide and the land was untamed. I found a small cottage nestled near the edge of a vast, ancient forest. Here, the silence was different. It was not the empty, aching silence of my first lonely room. It was a living silence, filled with the rustle of leaves, the call of birds, and the gentle sigh of the wind through the tall pines. Nature became my silent confidant, its quiet strength a source of comfort and stability in my fractured life. I learned to be self-reliant, to depend only on myself. I planted a garden, tending to the fragile seedlings with a care I once reserved for my family relationships. Watching them grow, pushing through the dark soil towards the light, gave me a sense of purpose. I walked the forest trails, learning the names of the trees and the paths of the animals. The forest taught me about resilience. I saw trees scarred by lightning that continued to grow, and rivers that found new paths around obstacles. These small natural dramas were a mirror to my own life, showing me that survival was possible, even after great damage. My work became my focus. I took a job at a local conservation project, dedicating my days to protecting the wilderness that had, in turn, protected me. The work was hard and often solitary, but it was meaningful. I found a quiet satisfaction in contributing to something larger than myself. My colleagues were kind but distant, respecting my privacy. They knew little of my past, and I offered them no details. I had built a new life, a fortress of solitude and routine, designed to keep the pain of the past at bay. But even in the deepest wilderness, the ghosts of my former life were never far away. Despite the peace I had found, a deep-seated loneliness remained. There were nights when the quiet of the forest felt less like a comfort and more like an indictment of my isolation. I would look up at the vast, star-filled sky and feel impossibly small and alone. Hope was a flicker, a tiny flame that I carefully guarded against the winds of despair. I dreamed of reconciliation, of a day when the truth might be revealed, but I never dared to reach out. The pain of the initial rejection was too raw, the wound too deep. I had accepted my exile, carving a life for myself in the quiet margins of the world. Time just kept moving forward, slow and unstoppable. The lines around my eyes deepened, marked by sun and sorrow. The forest became as familiar to me as my own skin. I could feel its moods, from the vibrant green of spring to the stark, skeletal beauty of winter. The wilderness, honestly, it shaped me. Some of my rough edges were smoothed away, but others just grew harder. I became as resilient and self-contained as those old-growth trees standing guard around my home. The sharp, searing pain of my family's betrayal faded, turning into a dull ache. Something I learned to live with, just part of my emotional landscape. My life settled into a quiet, predictable rhythm. I worked, I tended my garden, I walked the endless trails. There was a kind of contentment in this simple existence, a peace I had fought hard to find. Still, I was always aware of what was missing. Sometimes I'd see families hiking together, their laughter echoing through the trees, and a pang of longing would hit me. I was a spectator of life's connections, always on the outside looking in. Sure, I had friends, but I kept them at a safe distance, afraid to let anyone get close enough to hurt me again. My heart felt like a locked room, the key long since lost. The hope for reconciliation had almost withered away. It was like a fragile plant I'd stopped watering, left to survive on its own. So much time had passed. What could I possibly say to them? What could they say to me? The gap between us just seemed too wide to cross. I'd imagined my parents growing older, my sister maybe starting a family of her own. Were they happy? Did they ever think of me? These questions haunted my quiet moments, like ghosts whispering in the rustling leaves, never offering answers. The silence from my family was absolute, a wall of indifference I no longer had the strength to challenge. Then, one autumn afternoon, as the leaves turned brilliant red and gold, a strange unease settled over me. It was a subtle shift in the air, a premonition that something was about to change. The wilderness had taught me to trust those instincts, the ones that run beneath the surface of conscious thought. A storm was gathering, not just in the sky, but in the unseen currents of my life. I didn't know what was coming, but deep down, I sensed that the careful, quiet world I'd built for myself was about to be disturbed forever. The call came on a Tuesday, shattering the peaceful routine of my morning. The number was unfamiliar, from a city I'd left behind long ago. I almost didn't answer, but, well, something made me pick up. The voice on the other end was frantic, choked with a desperation I hadn't heard in years. It was my father. He sounded older, his voice frail and thin. He spoke my name, and in that single word, I heard a decade of unspoken regret. The storm I'd sensed had finally broken, and its force was more powerful than I could have ever imagined. Clara was in the hospital. A sudden, severe illness had struck her down. My father's words were clinical and terrifying: organ failure, critical condition, a desperate need for a living donor. He explained that the family had been tested, but no one was a match. And then came the question, the reason for his call after so many years. They'd found my information through an old record, a last, desperate attempt. He was asking, pleading, for me to be tested. The irony was almost too much to bear. The sister who had cast me out, who had poisoned my family against me, now needed a part of me to live. I drove through the night, the familiar landscape of my quiet life disappearing behind me. The city loomed on the horizon, huge, noisy, nothing like the home I'd made for myself. Every mile brought a fresh wave of emotions. There was anger, a cold knot of resentment for all the years I'd lost. There was fear for the sister I hardly knew anymore. And beneath it all, there was this strange, unwelcome flicker of hope. This wasn't the reconciliation I'd ever imagined, but it was a connection, a brutal, desperate tether pulling me back into my family's orbit. Arriving at the hospital felt like stepping into another world. The sterile smell, the hushed urgency. It was so different from the clean air and natural sounds I was used to. I saw my parents in the waiting room, and the change in them was shocking. They were stooped and gray, their faces lined with worry and exhaustion. When my mother saw me, her eyes filled with tears, and she took a hesitant step forward. There were no apologies, no explanations, just the raw reality of the crisis that had brought us together. The lie that had torn us apart seemed in that moment like a distant, almost trivial thing compared to life and death. The tests were a blur. Needles, machines, doctors moving quickly. I was a match. The doctors explained the procedure, the risks, the recovery. I listened, my mind strangely calm. In that sterile clinical place, the decision was clear. It wasn't about forgiveness or revenge. It was about life. A human life was at stake, and I had the power to help. All those years of anger and resentment seemed to just fall away, replaced by a simple, profound sense of purpose. The wilderness had taught me that all life is connected, that even the most damaged parts of an ecosystem play a role. I was part of this family, whether I liked it or not. The surgery was successful. In the quiet days of recovery, the healing began. Not just for Clara, but for all of us. My mother would sit by my bedside, her hands fumbling as she tried to find words for a decade of regret. My father, never one for words, would bring me a cup of tea, his eyes saying what his voice could not. The silence between us wasn't a weapon anymore, but a space for quiet contemplation, a place where new understanding could begin to grow. We didn't talk about the lie, not yet. Instead, we spoke of the weather, of my garden, of small, simple things. We were learning to be a family again, one hesitant step at a time. When I was strong enough, I visited Clara. She was pale and weak, a shadow of the vibrant, confident sister I remembered. Her first word to me was sorry. It was a small broken sound, but it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken apologies. She told me everything, the jealousy, the insecurity, that single impulsive lie that spiraled out of control. It was a story not of malice, but of profound, youthful fear. Listening to her, I didn't feel anger. I felt a deep, aching pity for the young woman she had been, and for the years we both lost. Forgiveness wasn't some big decision. It was more like a slow, gentle sunrise, gradually warming the frozen landscape of my heart. Our family is like a fractured land, slowly being mended. The scars will always be there, deep ravines carved by years of pain and silence. But in those cracks, new life is beginning to grow. We're learning to navigate this new terrain together with more care and compassion than before. I haven't gone back to my cottage in the forest, not yet. For now, I'm here, in the messy, complicated, beautiful wilderness of my family. The path ahead is uncertain, but for the first time in a very long time, I'm not walking it alone. The journey has been long and hard, but it's led me back home, to a place of forgiveness and renewed